If God wants us to trust him, then why does it seem like he makes it so incredibly difficult to do so? This is a question that someone sent me, and I think it's a valid one because you would think if you want someone to trust you, there would be a better way than sending them letters through strangers from all over the world over thousands of years. Or if you wanted someone to know that you loved them, you would think there would be a better way than subjecting them to a life of disappointment and then the very few things that they actually enjoy doing, making those things against the rules. And the truth is, from a human perspective, these arguments all make perfect sense. The problem is that God is not human, he is spirit. And even though we're born as humans, God's intention for us is that we would also be born again as spirit, which means that when we address these types of questions and these types of thoughts, we have to address them through spiritual eyes instead of natural eyes. So let's get into it. Now, to answer this question, we first have to look at the questions behind the question, which is 1, why does God care if we trust him? And 2, what exactly does he want us to trust him about? Now, we find the answer in the book of Ephesians. It says that God created us in love before the foundations of the universe for his good pleasure and purpose, that we would be his sons. And so we were created in love to be his sons. Now, for a relationship to be based in love, we must meet one crucial condition. It cannot be forced. Otherwise, the relationship will be based on obligation, coercion, or control instead of love. Now, how do we know this? Because we can see this demonstrated in other relationships in creation. If you look at the angels, they were created to be servants. So the basis of their relationship is obligation, and it's maintained by fear and punishment. The same is true of material creation. It was created to obey. And you see this in the book of Job, where it says that I said to the waves, or where were you when I said to the waves, this is your boundary, you will go no further. So the basis of the relationship for the material creation is control, and it's maintained through programming. But God didn't want that kind of relationship with us. He wanted a relationship based in love, which means the rules are different. And it also means that we're unique in creation, because where the servant is obligated to do the master's bidding and the material is controlled by the master's programming, we are neither obligated or controlled. Instead, God chose to present us with the evidence of his love and then give us the option to choose. Or you could put it another way, that our relationship is based in consent while other relationships are based in compulsion. So returning to our two questions, why does God want us to trust him? And what does he want us to trust him about? The answer is, he wants us to trust him because without trust, we cannot have a relationship based in love. And what he wants us to trust him about is that he loves us so that we will choose to engage him in that relationship. There's just one problem. In order for us to trust him in either of these things, we would need 3 things. First, we would need a proper definition of love, or a correct definition of love. Second, we would need evidence that he actually loves us. And third, we would need a certainty that we were not somehow programmed to choose him, but rather we're actually choosing out of a genuine desire to be in that relationship with him. And that's where we start to see the dilemma. I mean, how does God teach us what love is without appearing to have a bias, since his whole reason for teaching us what love is so that we'll love him? Or how does he demonstrate love to us in a way where we can actually trust his motives? And then lastly, how could we ever trust that we are actually choosing him when our power imbalance is so extreme that he could literally code it into our DNA to choose him and we'd never be the wiser? And the answer is actually found in reversing the order. So let me show you how this works. So in order to trust that we're not being manipulated, we would first have to have the ability to choose the opposite of him, and we would need to be able to do so in an unlimited fashion, right? So that way, nobody could ever make the argument that he manipulated the options available to us so that we would choose him, right? He didn't narrow the funnel where all of the options that we had were so bad that basically the only real option was to choose him. So we had to have the ability to choose to an unlimited extent the opposite of him so that no one could make that accusation of manipulating the funnel to drive us to him, for lack of a better word. And we see how he solved that problem in the beginning through the Garden of Eden. He gave us the option to learn what love is directly from him, or to discover it through testing the knowledge of good and evil. And to ensure that we had absolute autonomy, he allowed us to experience the maximum consequence for our actions, because if you don't allow a person to experience the full consequence for their action, then you actually destroy the value of their autonomy or the value of their decision making. Then, when we chose testing, he endured with us while we tested literally every form of evil to the maximum possible extent within this physical realm. And then finally, when we had filled the earth with evil and all come under guilt for violating God's laws, he demonstrated the purity of his motives by subjecting himself to our highest form of cruelty in order to save us, which reveals that his love is genuine and that his motives are pure. Because if he had the power and the intelligence to force us, and he chose not to do that, but rather he chose coming down to our level, allowing us to treat him however we pleased, and all of that so that we could see the extent to which he is willing to go in order to demonstrate his love. Which brings us to our final dilemma of how can we recognize all of these demonstrations of love if we have an incorrect definition of love? And how do we get to the correct definition of love if the person who's supposed to be the source of that definition has an inherent bias for giving it to us? Now, this to me is the genius of God, because the way he did it is that he allowed us to learn through antithesis. He gave us the choice to learn directly from him so that we weren't forced to learn it through experiencing evil, which is the antithesis, because that wouldn't have been loving. But then, when we chose to learn by experience, he actually allowed us to learn through antithesis so that we could trust that the definition of love isn't being manipulated, since by our own experience, we have the basis of comparison. Essentially, by allowing us to learn what evil was by experience, it gave us a basis of comparison so that when we encountered God, who is the opposite of evil, we would be able to evaluate from our own experiences that the thing that he's bringing to us seems better than the thing that we've been experiencing. Because without that experience, we would then just have to trust that whatever it is that he's telling us is good or loving is actually good and loving. And that's exactly the problem that Eve ran into in the garden. When Satan said God is lying to you, he's actually doing evil towards you by withholding. She didn't really have an answer because she had no experiential basis by which to compare. And this is where things get really crazy, because that means that all of the things that we would commonly point to as obstacles for trusting God, all the personal traumas that we experience, all the disappointments that we experience, the natural friction of living in this natural realm, all of these things are actually the very things that give us the basis of comparison to recognize his love without having to question whether the definition was manipulated. And when you put all three of these things together, the definition of love being the opposite of evil, the ability to trust God's motives towards us through Jesus' sacrifice, and the confidence that our choices are not being manipulated due to the existence of others choosing the opposite of God and the allowance of those choices to reach their absolute extreme, we are left with an unassailable argument that we can trust God to teach us about a reality beyond our own. That we can trust him when he tells us to do things that seem contrary to our natural experiences, like not worrying about what you're going to eat or what you're going to drink or what you're going to wear, but rather seeking first the kingdom instead and trusting that he's going to give those things to us. Or when he says that he's loving us by not allowing us to take possession of things that we want because we're not ready yet. Or he prevents us from pursuing passions that we think are going to make us happy because they're going to make our flesh happy, but ultimately will destroy our soul. We can trust him when he allows us to experience difficulty as discipline so that our character is prepared and can withstand temptation instead of drawing us away from him, which is literally the most loving thing that he can do because he is the absolute source of good. And so when we experience difficulty and that difficulty drives us away from him, it actually drives us away from the very thing that can heal us after the experience has built up our character. All of this is why I believe it feels like God is making it hard to trust him. It's not because that's true. It's actually because we don't understand the relationship that he wants to have with us and the conditions that are required for that relationship to exist. But when we get this understanding, when we get this revelation, we actually begin to perceive those obstacles as the very things that make him trustworthy.